Hello and welcome to the Emissaries of the Gospel podcast. My name is Jeremy Brown. I'm your host. And if you haven't already, please make sure that you subscribe to this channel and click the bell icon for notifications. That way you receive content whenever we put it out. That really helps this channel and it also helps our evangelistic ministry. Now, that being said, today's topic, we're going to talk about President Trump and the recent assassination attempt on him. And we're going to talk a little bit about God's sovereignty and a number of things that are related to that. The first thing I wanted to mention coming out of the gate is how interesting it is that CNN and some of the other legacy media companies reporting on it were so disingenuous, obviously disingenuous. Anybody who was watching, anybody who saw even just a clip from that knew that those were obvious gunshots. You could see that President Trump was holding onto his ear. He grabbed up to his ear. And you may or may not have noticed the blood initially that was on him when he got up. It is very clear the Secret Service, rushed to surround him and to be kind of like a human shield for him. And so it was like gaslighting, seeing headlines that were coming out saying things like that. The Secret Service had to rush to President Trump because he fell on the stage, as though he were like Joe Biden, right? President Biden, or Trump startled by loud noise, right? I mean, theoretically, I guess you could say that that's true, but it's disingenuous because it trivializes it or makes it sound like something else is going on. And there were a number of those headlines that initially came out. And then it didn't take long to correct them as far as, the news cycle goes. I mean, but it's unacceptable to have those coming out when you see on social media. You already see what's going on. You have screenshots and whatnot that are already popping up. And you're getting more accurate news that way than you were from these legacy media companies. But it seems like, they were a bit more inclined to try to minimize the event or even and trivialize it, which seems really inappropriate. It would be better for them to hold off on putting out any kind of headline and put out something that's credible and trustworthy, something that's reliable. I know that that's not their MO, that's not their goal, right? They spread all kinds of misinformation and seemingly intentionally doing so, right? I find it hard to defend the contrary, right? This is something that just shows us that if you're looking elsewhere for your news and not going to legacy media, then you're being wise because they obviously do not have informing you in your best interest at heart, right? The other thing that I noticed is that all kinds of conspiracy theorists crawled out of the woodwork instantaneously, and this is nothing new now. We see this all the time, but it's just very interesting the types of conspiracy theories that came out. I think it's very reasonable to be considering certain possibilities, right? Obviously, if people were speculating whether the CIA was involved or the Secret Service was involved, and they're questioning that versus just abject incompetence, right? And which seems more likely. That's a reasonable type of speculation. But then you have these people that are saying foolish things, like they think President Trump was in on it, right? And that he tried to orchestrate having a bullet fly less than an inch from his brain, right? Numerous bullets fly, and that one of them would hit a man in attendance, right? These are things that are just foolish speculation. Like, you would have really here's the thing. I consider that a ninth commandment violation, and here's why. Because if you don't actually have any real evidence to go on, like hard evidence, not speculation on circumstantial evidence, not just your speculation on what could happen, or who you think is somehow the puppet master pulling the strings of the puppet masters there, right? But some hard, tangible evidence that shows that that has to be the case, then really that type of wild speculation is really inappropriate. It's sinful, and honestly, it's embarrassing, and it's kind of stupid. Um, I mean, who would do that? Who would do that, right? Especially with someone. This is not like you have some experienced sniper up there that you. Yeah, I wouldn't even do that then, right? Anybody who knows anything about firearms and who's used them is not going to make that gamble, right? That's dumb. But it's not like we're talking about an experienced sniper up on the roof where it's feasible that someone could say, oh yeah, he can definitely make sure he misses that closely, right? I mean, it's just dumb, right? It's dumb. And also, why would he orchestrate something like that when it's showing he's ahead in the polls, he's running against somebody who does not have all of his mental faculties, and it's becoming more and more painfully obvious, even to the people who have a vested interest in denying that reality, right? Plus the state of the nation and the economy and whatnot right now, everything favors him, right? And so why would he have any need to do that? That makes no sense whatsoever, right? So there are certain voices out there, certain types of conspiracy theorists that really do seem like they're you know breaking out the old tinfoil hat, right? Like, I think there, again, like I said, there's legitimate questions that can be answered, legitimate inquiries, right? Which I think, you know, if we had a trustworthy, righteous government, would be the type of inquiry investigation that they would be looking into, right? To see, whether or not there was some type of collusion here, or at the very least, if it's incompetence, there should be the head of the Secret Service and possibly some of the agents being fired or being forced to resign, right? I know she has said that she's not going to be resigning over this, at least the last I saw earlier today, um, which is a whole other thing, right? It is judgment from God on us that we have not only women in law enforcement, but we have women who are in the Secret Service who are tasked with guarding the president. And if you watch that, there was a moment where, the woman Secret Service agent kind of seemed to be cowering a little bit. Then she ran over to President Trump, but it actually, in that moment, looked like he was the one defending her, right? Which, in reality, is, in some ways, is the way it should be. But he's a former president. He's running for president. He should be the one being protected, right? But his protectors should be men, and men who have a skill set and stature and so forth where they're capable of protecting him, right? I mean, there are actual qualifications for the job that not everybody can have, right? And one of them certainly should be that you're a male and have a certain stature, right? So some of that's rather embarrassing too, right? And certainly if there was no shenanigans and plotting and scheming going on with certain agencies, then it is an abysmally gross failure and demonstration of complete negligence and incompetence from a group that have a reputation historically of being among the most prepared, of being the most diligent, the most thorough, and it's very concerning in some ways, but it's very embarrassing, I think, and just shameful that they could. It's not even. To me, just my eyes, just using common sense, it doesn't seem like it's that hard of a plot to be able to envision or foresee. It's the only building with the direct line of sight to where the former president would be speaking. Seems like the building that you would want to make sure somebody can't climb up with a ladder or with a rifle and be able to take a few shots, right? Like that just seems like common sense. Having people that were there, multiple reports of people saying that they notified police and the Secret Service, and that they didn't both jump into action at that point, and a number of other accounts. I don't want to get into all of them because I think right now the speed of the news coming out and different accounts, might make it easy to jump on one as truthful over another. I'm even mentioning the eyewitness accounts because there were numerous ones, and there doesn't seem to be a counter narrative for that yet. I think that's pretty reliable, but I'm afraid that if I got into all of the things that are being reported out there, that there would be some misinformation that I might incidentally fall into. And so I don't want to do that. And that's not the point of this episode. But I did want to just mention some of those things because they're out there. So you do have people discussing, did God save and preserve President Trump, which obviously he did, right? God is sovereign over everything. God is in supreme control over every event that happens from beginning to end. There's no aspect of it, there's no event, there's nothing that's outside of his knowledge and control and outside of his plan, right? So I want to read some verses, and I just also wanted to make sure I mention too, we know from the scripture that not one hair can fall from our heads apart from the Lord, right? So he has predestined all things, anything that may come to pass against us, right? Whether it seems good or seems bad, whether we understand what good God may be working through it or not, whatnot, whether it seems like it's judgment or not, all of those things are sovereignly ordained by God and carried out exactly according to his will, right? So Psalm 135 verse 6 says, whatever the Lord pleases he does in heaven and on earth, in the seas and all deeps. Right? So God, everything that happens in heaven, on the earth, everything that happens in the seas, everything that happens, in the waters beneath the earth and whatnot, everywhere that things happen, it's the Lord's doing, and he does as he pleases. Romans 8:28 says, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. So we know that God, having this event take place in the first place, and also his protection of Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, that these things are ordained by God to work together for the good of God's people, right? It may not work together for the good of people who are not God's people, but those who are, God is working all things together for their good, right? For our good. Psalm 103:19. The Lord has established his throne in the heavens, and his kingdom rules over all. Right? Proverbs 16:33, the lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord, right? So every event that happens, everything that seems like a random chance event is actually something that is foreordained and carried out by God, right? He's the one that makes that decision. The heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps, right? So, this is interesting too, because if you think about it, many people went to that campaign event with different plans, right? You had people who were in attendance who were there planning to bring their family, and they were planning to show their support for former President Trump, right? They were planning to hear him out, perhaps. They were planning to go there and then explain something about about citizenship or about politics or whatnot with their family, with their kids, right? All these people had plans. President Trump had plans when he went there. The person who went up on that roof had a particular plan, right? The Secret Service had a plan, right? Everybody who was there had some kind of plan, right? But as we see, the Lord establishes His steps, right? So we all have plans and we try to carry them out, but it's the Lord who sees whether or not they succeed, right? The way that we want. It's Him who has His ultimate plan unfolding, and our plans are contingent on His plans, right? Which is why we petition the Lord, um, so that our will become more closely aligned with the will of God, right? And Job 42:2 says, I know that you can do all things and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. So then he has mercy. Sorry, I'm reading Romans 9:18 now. So that he has mercy on whomever he wills and he hardens whomever he wills, right? So we know that God here, just like in our salvation, and God working that out, we know that even in acts like this, that God can change the heart of that shooter, or He can harden it. God can cause His plans to fail, or He can cause them to be carried out. God was in control of all of that, right? So, a lot of people um, were discussing that afterwards. One of the things former President Trump had said was that he was alive by the grace of God, right? And that's absolutely true. And hopefully, what this did, hopefully, what this event did was it caused him to fall on his knees and seek the Lord. That even perhaps when he went down to the ground to take cover, that he was crying out to the Lord in his heart or mentally, right? Or when he went home that night, or even when he was, going to receive medical treatment, that he looked to the Lord, right? That he called out and cried out to the Lord. That I'm hoping that was the case, because certainly President Trump needs the Lord. And he has said before that he didn't think he needed forgiveness. So there's this weird situation where he seems to profess the Lord in some instances, and certainly references him a lot, right? But then in other instances says things which seem very contrary to just the basics of the gospel, like saying he doesn't believe, he's never asked for forgiveness and it's never believed he's needed forgiveness. That's completely contrary to the gospel, right? So he he definitely needs to cry out to the Lord and humble himself before the Lord if he hasn't already, right? And I hope that he has, and I hope that he did the other night too, because certainly he was right about one thing, that the only reason that he is still alive is by the grace of God, right? So hopefully that is something that if he hadn't before, caused him to humble himself before the Lord and call out to Him and seek His forgiveness, right? And then I hope that would also bring him to a point where he would seek to be more just and more righteous, right? Yes, he has done some good things. I think his first presidency exceeded a lot of people's expectations, right? It definitely had a lot of major issues, and certainly shouldn't be something that we consider a big victory, because it wasn't, right? But placing judges that strike down Roe v. Wade is not nothing. However, I will add to that the righteous decision would have been to criminalize abortion everywhere in all circumstances, right? Um, he did some good things economically. Again, it was a very mixed bag, right? But there were a lot of major ethical, moral issues with his first presidency too. So I don't want to ignore that. But one of the things, before we move away from God's sovereignty in this and into the rest of what I wanted to talk about, was just the fact that there are some people online saying some these are Christians like pastors and theologians saying some ridiculous, stupid things that are kind of like the Jesus juke, right? So if somebody says, "Oh, God moved the bullet," right, and then you think that it's your point to come out and say, well, no, God was there for, the whole thing. He didn't just move the bullet, but he had planned its trajectory all along and everything that led up to. Obviously, he did, right? Where when normal people use normal speech and they speak like that, it's the same thing as if you said, the sun's going to come up tomorrow, right? Well, technically, we know that the sun isn't actually, what's moving. We're moving around the sun, right? And we're rotating. Um, but it's a figure of speech and everybody knows what you're talking about. And so only somebody who's really like a pedantic fool who's full of themselves, or just can't help not being contentious about that is going to, try to come up and, you know, try to correct everybody in how they're saying that, right? It's a silly thing. People are acknowledging the grace and sovereignty of God, Almighty God, there, whether they're a believer or an unbeliever. So it's a very good thing, right? And so it's a very inappropriate and really inauthentic gesture to come out and feel the need that you have to, try to um, have every element of your, Calvinistic worldview expressed there, right? That's just not, it's not necessary. It's not appropriate. And just anybody who's a thinking person, like understands what those people actually mean, when they say that. So again, completely unnecessary commentary, but you see this kind of stuff, and there's a few guys out there who are doing that, and I just want to ask, if you're somebody who does that, or if you even thought that that was like reasonable, what does that gain? What do you think you're going to accomplish by saying that, right? It seems asinine to me. So, um, so if you're viewing that and you're kind of trying to follow along, even if the person is technically correct, theologically, and I'm a big person on being precise, theologically, but um, it, you have to have some form of situational awareness, right? Like, so that would be what I would implore you towards is have a little bit of self awareness, right? Um, so then, what might be some of the good? We mentioned that God works all things together for the good of those who love Him, right? For His people, those who are called according to His good purposes, right? Um, so, what might some of those good things be? Well, number one, um, with all of the polarized division in our politics, right? And this is obviously somebody who was really radicalized to the point of extreme violence, like deadly violence, right? Um, and you see a lot more of that on the left than they care to own, right? This isn't something that is like predominantly like a right wing thing. In fact, generally speaking, um, those kind of things don't really happen as far as like political assassination attempts from the right. I'm not saying it's not possible because it certainly is, right? But you just don't really see much of that. You don't see a lot of riots from the right and those kind of things. You usually see that from the left. Um, and, rioting is actually the language of those who love chaos. Riots is the language that's spoken by those who love chaos and death, right? So that's something, I know people try to um, make it sound like, oh, these are just people desperate to be heard, right? If a little boy has a attitude problem, right, you might say, oh, he's just crying out for help. All right, he's still sinning and he needs to be corrected, but maybe you could say that. But if that little boy starts killing animals and trying to do extreme violence to his classmates and whatnot, right? You're not going to look at that as just a cry for help. That's not just a cry for help, right? That's expressing something in their own soul that's wrong and sinful, right? And the other things that contribute to that, they need to be something that's accountable to. But the violence in that child's soul needs to be addressed. That is a spiritual problem that will destroy them and many other people if it isn't, right? And just like that, right? We could see that with a little kid. It's that much more dangerous when this is an adult. And right now, you have some adults that are very emotionally unstable, right? Um, and you also have a group of people that are becoming more and more um, oppressed. They're having their liberties infringed every which way. They're seeing a government overreach and usurp authority where it has no business being involved, right? And these are people on the right who are seeing this happen. They're seeing, their families being put in danger. They're seeing their livelihoods being put in danger. They're seeing their heritage being destroyed, and they're even seeing people giving away their heritage. It's not like there's some kind of fight over this in many cases, but there's some people who are just conceding it and giving it away, and it's wrong, right? At least a lot of it's wrong. Maybe not everything, right? And these are people that are upset. They might be grieving over that. Some of them are very angry over that, right? So that's kind of like a volatile combination, right? And so it's a good thing that that shooter, other than nicking the president's ear, or former president, I should say, other than nicking his ear, that he missed, right? Because that could have started a civil war, right? That's not a joke. I mean, we see a lot of issues that seem like they get pretty close, moving in that direction. And we've been a people that have been, a lot more passive than other generations in the past in terms of some of the stuff. But right now you see that there's like a polarizing effect, and the passivity is starting to go away. And if we want to be a people that is at peace, right? This is, we just did a episode on peace and tranquility, right? This is the type of thing where peace and tranquility really matter, and it's important to try to, work towards that, right? So it was a blessing that the former president was not killed by that. Also, we should not want to see somebody murdered, right? Just on just a fundamental level, right? He hadn't done something there that was worthy of death. He has not been found guilty in a court of law of a crime that's worthy of death, and until he is, none of us should should be rooting for somebody to go and kill him, right? Like that's just basic Christian decency, right? So praise God that he was not hit, and that we don't have a much larger, more destructive, and more deadly problem on our hands, right? Because that very easily could have, within hours, turned into extreme violence, right? Well, like widespread. So I'm very glad that that's not the case. So that was one, one blessing that came from that, right? Is that we avoided that problem, right? Another blessing that may come from it is it looks like it solidified a lot more people behind the former president than before, right? And so as I look at this in two ways, right? One is, whoever God sovereignly ordains to be our leader is either going to lead us further into God's judgment or is going to start repenting and leading us out of it, right? So that's one thing to consider. Another aspect to that is our, what's our responsibility? What's our duty there? There's actually like covenantal responsibilities. God gives us very clear instructions in the scripture on who is somebody that is a candidate that we can draft or choose for a leader over ourselves civilly. I'm not talking about a pastor, right? Not even talking about, a spouse or whatever. We're talking about a civil ruler, right? Civil magistrate. God tells us who is qualified and who isn't. And so it behooves us to be aware of that and to honor that. I think we'll do a short episode on that in the near future. So if we look at what are the problems that we face, policy decisions, platforms, that's kind of a mixed bag, but certainly let's say that you and I did not vote for former President Trump in the upcoming election, and he still wins, maybe in a landslide victory, maybe in one of the historic landslides even, um, and he moves us further away from God's judgment in some way. Starts part of the restoration project that really needs to happen in this country, right? Spiritually and financially and judicially and otherwise, right? So let's just say that's what happens. That would be a blessing on God's people, even if he would be a far less than ideal candidate, right? But then there comes the idea that we do have not only the right to vote, but a duty to vote. We should be choosing our leaders, and we should be doing so wisely and in a biblical way, right? Now then comes the question from many people, well, what if I don't have a righteous, godly candidate that meets the criteria, right? Then you have some things to consider, right? Do you have the opportunity to write somebody in or pick somebody else? Can we draft another leader? If not, then what you got to look at is the next time around comes up, it's on you. Not somebody else. Here's the thing, and this happens a lot with what I consider to be kind of like the pragmatist guys, right? These are usually the guys who have a fairly decent platform or position of influence or whatever, whether it be in their church, in their denomination, maybe they're a social media influencer or somehow otherwise in their community influential. And a lot of these people will say, well, there's not a godly candidate, right? And they kind of wash their hands of it. But these are the exact kind of people that can be themselves exerting a lot of influence over drafting a righteous candidate, right? Getting behind somebody that will help a lot of other people get behind them, will give them some momentum. And actually get a qualified candidate there. And those are the people, especially, right? Everybody can say they're responsible, but those people, especially, like, to whom much is given, much will be required, right? Those are the people that should be helping to draft those righteous candidates. And what happens, especially if they're very pragmatic, is they seem to sit on their hands. They want to comment on it, but they don't want to rock the boat, really, right? Like, it almost seems like some of them are afraid, like, if they go to draft somebody who's a really good candidate, and then let's say that person loses in the primaries, right, and heading into the general election, they're worried that maybe they won't have as much influence, or maybe they're worried that it'll hurt the party, or there could be a variety of things that they're worried about. But I think those worries are misplaced. Those are the people who are most especially having a responsibility to make sure a righteous candidate is drafted. And then what I would say is, with what you would call less than ideal candidates, right? I think we can all acknowledge that while there's no sinless man, because Jesus isn't running for office, right? Jesus is King of Kings, and he's not worried about that. It's not up for vote, right? But until he returns, there's going to be earthly rulers set up, earthly kings and magistrates and whatnot. And there are people, just like when you look for a pastor in your church, you're not looking for a man who's sinless, right? You're not looking for a man who's necessarily perfect, because they're not going to be, right? But you are looking for someone who's qualified. And, we have to acknowledge that qualified men exist. Well, they do in the civil realm too, right? In fact, there wouldn't be any qualified men pastoring churches if we didn't even have qualified men to be able to, you know, lead a nation or to judge a community, right? So let's do away with the foolishness that basically throws our hands up in the air like it's not possible to ever have anybody, right? And let's look to actually get those people there. And if you have the capability, right, then you should run, especially if you're a person who's connected in some way in your community, or you have some type of either network or resources or whatnot behind you that will help you in that. If you have something other than just your own limited, potentially limited resources or and in your own efforts, right? If you have the ability to get that kind of momentum behind you, and you are a righteous, Bible believing, God fearing Christian, then you should consider whether or not God would have you run. And if not run, then certainly be somehow involved, right? Like just go to at least one or two, city council meetings a month, or maybe once a month, go to a county commission meeting. It doesn't have to take up, you know, half your week, right? A lot of people act like they don't have any time whatsoever, but everybody has 24 hours in a day. It depends on what you're prioritizing, right? And if you're prioritizing things that are predominantly recreation when you're outside of work, if we definitely need to have productive households, but it could be, in some people's cases, it could be greed, right? Like maybe you don't actually need to try to get even more money. Maybe there's something else that God would have you do, right? Maybe you don't have to go to every single church event, like if they have a youth group event, and you could also be going to the county commission meeting, right? And you have to choose between the two. Like maybe you go to the county commission meeting. But then, I'm not advocating for you to skip out on a service, right? An actual like worship service or something like that. You got to go to those, but I'm presuming that they don't do those every day of the week, and certainly the Lord does not require you to be there every day of the week, right? So, all right, so that's enough on our responsibility on that. I think the other thing that I wanted to comment on really quick is just President Trump's recent kind of reversal, not a reversal, I wouldn't say that, but his change in position on the issue of abortion and how that has negatively impacted the Republican National Convention and the Republican Party platform. It's really bad because obviously you can't move away from that. That is human life. That's the image of God, the Imago Dei, right? It's not something that we can just change for political expediency. So that's a real problem, right? And I'm hoping that he is actually repented of, or is in the process of repenting of that change, and that he's going to become more of an abolitionist type of candidate, right? But let's just put that aside for a second, say that that's not the case. That should be a real big problem for us, because that issue, more than any other, is an issue that brings God's judgment on this nation, right? We tend to look at the things that impact like our individual rights and our pocketbook first, or our wallet, or our bank account, right? Whatever word you want to put there. But we look at the things that impact our household finances first. So we look at tax policies and promises regarding that, promises regarding the economy and gas prices and grocery prices and rent prices and mortgages and all those things. And those are all important. They have their place, right? But they're not more important than human life. They're not. We need to start developing, biblically minded sense of priorities, right? So obviously God is our greatest priority, and there's some issues there that we definitely need to figure out, especially the people who are estranged from God. who are under God's wrath, his wrath abides on them still, right? They need to be reconciled to God through the Lord Jesus Christ. They're putting faith in him and the work that he did on the cross to pay for their sin, right? So that they would be given his righteousness, and that all of their sin would be paid for. It would be removed from them. As far away as the east is from the west, that's how far their transgressions will be removed from them, right? We know that. So that's the first priority, right? But then you see that when it comes to, if your household finances would be maybe in shambles for the rest of your life, but you would know that hundreds of thousands and millions even of human lives would be saved every single year, right? If you rightly prioritize things and got passionate about it, that you were visible and vocal about it, you could be seen. Your position on that would be seen and heard, and that you would see to it that would be the case, right? If you could have that, or you could, have much greater prosperity for you and your family and even your offspring, right? Which would you choose, right? Now, hopefully, generally speaking, it's not either or, right? Like usually what happens is if you're obedient in the first, the latter is going to start to follow, right? Because God's blessings follow obedience as a general rule, right? That's a general principle. It's kind of baked into his creation, right? But if you have to choose between the two, you have to know that the second is the wrong choice, right? You cannot prioritize just your security or your comfort, or even your luxury, but certainly your security and your comfort, you can't prioritize over human life, right? Like that's just base level Christian ethics, right? So hopefully you'd recognize that. Now, you should be applying that to your decisions politically, right? Like if you're worried about everything that affects your bank account, then hopefully you've already considered all the issues that affect human life first, right? And so that would be my exhortation to you is what are the issues? There's obviously one that we've already talked about, but what are the issues here that directly impact human life, right? And those should be the issues that we're most passionate about and that factor most heavily into our decision. So, do we think someone's going to get us into a war, right? Well, that should be considered, right? Do we think that, somebody's going to be likely to, send drones to other countries, and for what reason, right? We should consider that. Certainly immigration is a big issue, right? And obviously the abortion issue, which I just mentioned. So, there are other issues. This isn't meant to be an exhaustive list, but these are the kind of things that we should, in our minds, be prioritizing and say, okay, these are the biggest things, right? And then the price of gas is a big thing that I deal with every day, but it's not in the same level, right? It's not as great of an importance as the things that directly impact whether or not my neighbor lives or dies, right? So hopefully this has been helpful, and please make sure you leave comments if you have any questions, any pushback, any objections to anything that I've said. I love it when our listeners comment, and you can look us up on Facebook as well, Emissaries of the Gospel on Facebook. And until next time, I hope this episode has been a blessing to you, and may the Lord bless the rest of your week.